I've seen plenty of strange things in the woods, but nothing prepared me for the cabin with the table. It started as a photography trip. I'm not a professional, just someone who likes capturing the bones of forgotten places. Old barns with their ribs showing, mills leaning over creeks, houses that seem to sag under memories too heavy for them. On that trip, I was looking for an abandoned fire tower I'd read about online. Instead, I found the cabin. The trail was barely a trail, just deer runs tangled with brush. My GPS had lost signal, and the map app on my phone was useless. I followed instinct more than anything, trying to climb higher ground to reorient myself. That's when I saw it through the trees. A crooked chimney pushing out of the forest floor like a gravestone. The cabin sat in a small clearing, tilted but standing. The roof had half caved in on one side, but the front looked intact. Ivy wrapped around the logs like veins. The windows were smeared with grime. It looked like every other ruin I'd photographed, until I stepped inside. The air smelled wrong. Not just damp or moldy, but sharp, like food left out too long. I expected empty cans or maybe some hunter's trash. Instead, what I saw made my breath catch. In the center of the single room sat a table, square and solid, set neatly for four. Bowls, plates, silverware. For wooden chairs, everything arranged like dinner had just been served, and the bowls weren't empty. Each one held something that looked fresh. Stew, maybe. Dark broth, vegetables, a few chunks of meat. The surface still had a faint sheen, as if oil floated on top. Steam didn't rise, but the smell, rich and salty, with a sour undertone, hung in the air. I stood frozen in the doorway. I had seen people squat in cabins before, but this didn't feel like that. The wood stove in the corner was cold. The bowls had no dust on them, though everything else, the shelves, the walls, the floorboards, was coated in decades of it. My rational brain worked overtime. Maybe some prankster set this up. Maybe a hunter liked to stage weird scenes for hikers. But then I noticed the details that made excuses crumble. The spoons. They weren't modern. They were heavy, tarnished silver. The bowls were ceramic, chipped around the edges, the kind of pattern you'd see in the 1940s or earlier. The tablecloth was thin cotton, yellowed with age, but clean, like it had been washed and pressed that morning. No one had carried these here recently. I pulled out my camera and took a photo, though my hand shook enough to blur the frame. That's when I caught movement. Not in the room, but in the glass of the window. Reflected there in the pale light, I saw them. 4 figures seated at the table. Heads bowed slightly, hands poised near the bowls. I spun around so fast, I almost dropped the camera. The chairs were empty. My pulse thudded in my ears. I forced myself to look back at the window. The reflection still showed them. 4 faint shapes, blurred like smoke, unmoving. I lifted the camera and snapped again. The flash went off, startling me. When I checked the screen, the photo showed nothing but the table. No figures. That should have been enough to make me leave, but I'm cursed with curiosity. I stepped closer to the table. The smell of the stew grew stronger, cloying, almost sweet. I leaned down. The broth wasn't cold. A faint warmth touched my cheek, like heat rising from skin. The chair across from me scraped. Not loud, just a gentle shift, as if someone invisible adjusted their seat. I shot upright, heart hammering. "Hello," I said stupidly. My voice cracked in the stillness. Something answered, not with words, but with the faintest sound of breath. 4 exhales at once, low and even, like people sitting down after a long day. The bowls rippled, though no spoon touched them. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the uneven floorboards. My instinct screamed to run, but another part of me, the stubborn part that had dragged me into dozens of unsafe places before, whispered, "Take proof. Get the evidence." So I raised the camera again. Through the lens, I saw it clearly this time. 4 pale faces around the table, blurred at the edges like old photographs left in water. Hollow eyes, mouth slightly open, waiting for me. The camera clicked, the flash burst, and when the light died, one of the bowls was empty. My throat went dry. I looked at the chair where the empty bowl sat. The reflection in the window showed only 3 figures now. The fourth was gone. The air behind me shifted. A weight, a presence, like someone leaning close enough to smell the fear on my skin. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My body locked up the way it does in nightmares. Sit, a voice breathed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't deep. It was level, almost polite, the way a host might invite you to dinner. But it came from inside my ear, not from across the room. I bolted. I don't even remember crossing the threshold. One moment I was frozen. The next I was crashing into daylight, branches clawing at my arms as I tore through the trees. My camera swung wildly on its strap. Every step I expected a hand to grab me, to drag me back to that table. I didn't stop until I saw the fire road where my car waited. I collapsed against the hood, chest heaving, stomach rolling. My head spun with the smell of that stew, clinging to me like smoke. When I finally calmed enough to breathe steady, I checked the photos. Most were normal, broken walls, the table, bowls of stew that looked strange but not supernatural. But the photo with the flash, the one that had shown 4 figures around the table, it was corrupted. The frame was streaked with white, as if light had tore it apart. But in the middle, faint and undeniable, was a face. Pale, hollow-eyed, its mouth open wider than any human mouth should open. The metadata said the picture was taken at 3:07 p.m. I checked my watch. It was only 2:44. I deleted the file. I don't know why. It felt dangerous to keep it. Like saving it would invite the thing back. But deleting it didn't change the memory burned into me. That night, in my apartment, I set the camera on the shelf and tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I smelled that stew. Thick and sour, sitting heavy in the back of my throat. At 3:07 a.m., my phone chimed. A single notification. Photo uploaded. It was the face. Smiling now. I don't know how it got there. I don't use cloud backups. I don't take my phone into the woods because it dies too fast without service. But there it was, crisp and clear, staring at me from my own screen. I smashed the phone against the wall until the screen cracked. I threw the pieces in the dumpster behind my building. Still, sometimes when I cook, when steam rises from the pot, I swear I smell that same stew. And in the corner of my eye, I see a chair shift just a little, like someone settling in. The table is waiting, and one bowl is still empty. I like places that other people forget. Old mills, empty farmhouses, broken bridges with weeds growing through the concrete. On weekends, I take my camera, a small backpack, and I walk into the woods to see what is still standing. I don't go for ghosts. I go for quiet. I go to see how time eats wood and iron. That is how I found the cabin with 2 doors. It was a long walk. No cell signal, just a paper map and a compass tied to my pack. I parked by an old fire road and followed a creek for almost an hour. The water made a low glass sound over stones. The forest was thick, but the air felt clean, like it had been washed the night before. I crossed a rotten footbridge, climbed a short hill, and there it was, a small cabin in a small clearing, gray as ash, with a door on the front and another door on the back. The roof was patched with rusted tin. The windows were blank. The whole thing leaned a little to the left, like it was tired of standing. What caught my eye first was the 2 doors. Most cabins like this have one door and a little stoop. This one had a front door and a back door lined up perfectly, like a hallway you could see straight through. The breeze pushed through both openings. It moved the leaves on the floor in a gentle line, like a path. I walked a slow circle around it. The grass in the clearing was short, almost like something grazed there. There were no fresh tracks, no tire marks, No footprints. No beer cans. It felt untouched but not empty. I always do 3 things before I step inside a place like this. First, I knock to make sure no one is squatting inside. Second, I call out once. Third, I go around again to look for holes in the floor or nests of wasps. I did all 3. "Hello," I said. Nothing answered but a bird deeper in the trees. I laid my hand on the front door frame. The wood was smooth where hands had used it for years and years. I took out a piece of carpenter's chalk from my pocket and drew an arrow on the outside, pointing in like I always do. If anything turns weird, I want to see what I did and where I came from. I also tied a length of orange cord to a sapling by the front step and then to my belt. It is a habit from caves and culverts. Inside, the cabin smelled like wet dust. The floor was covered in a thin layer of leaves and little black mouse droppings. There was a cast iron stove in one corner, a table with one leg broken, and a chair with no seat. On the wall beside the back door, someone had hammered a horseshoe upside down. The light came in pale and flat. It felt cool, colder than outside by a few degrees. I took a few photos of the stove and the table. I keep my shutter quiet when I shoot in old places so the sound doesn't break whatever is still there. The camera said 11:22 a.m. I moved toward the back door. Through it I could see more trees and a line of ferns and the slope of the hill falling away. The orange cord ran from the front step, across the cabin, and toward the back. I could feel the pull on my belt. I took one step through the back door. The world on the other side was not the same clearing. I froze. The cabin was behind me, yes, but the land past the threshold was different. The hill wasn't there. The ferns were gone. The light was strange, too shadowless, as if the sky was thin. The trees on this side were taller and closer together, and their bark had a lighter color, almost silver. I pulled the cord in my hand. It was tight like a line in a strong current, but when I looked back, the cord didn't run out to my front step anymore. It went into the ground and out of sight like a root. I stepped back into the cabin. The air changed. The hill and the ferns were back through the back door. My orange cord lay across the floor as if nothing had happened, vibrating a little from my shaking hand. I am not a person who jumps to the worst answer. I stood there and told myself I had missed something. Maybe I had turned without noticing. Maybe there were 2 clearings that looked the same, and my cord had snagged on a nail. I took a breath. I tried again. This time I left the cord on the floor. I marked the inside of the front door frame with a second chalk arrow pointing out. I checked my compass. The front door pointed roughly east. The back door pointed west. Good. Simple. I walked out the back door again, slow. Again, it was different. Same cabin behind me. Same door under my hand. But the world in front of me had shifted like a picture when you slide it in a frame. The clearing was larger now, with a stump in the center that I hadn't seen before. The grass was rippled, as if a wind had just passed. I lifted my camera and took a photo of the stump. The shutter clicked. I checked the time. 11:22 still. That made me feel worse for some reason. I turned around and looked through the back door into the cabin. Through it I could see the front door. Through the front door I could see the sapling with my cord tied to it, the very same one. My chalk arrow was there on the front frame. The orange line lay across the floor, quiet and harmless. Everything looked normal through the doors, like a straight tunnel. I stepped back inside. The cabin held the same light. The stove and the chair were the same, the dust the same. I picked up the cord and put on my belt again. I wanted a line back to the sapling that was truly the sapling. I walked out the front door. Now the front door did its trick. The orange cord pulled the way it should toward the sapling, but the forest line had changed. There was no creek where there had been a little one on my way in. The old footbridge was nowhere. Instead, there was a shallow depression with black water in it, like a footprint in the earth after a giant had stepped there in the rain. And there were marks. No, not tracks, just gouges. long, shallow lines in the dirt that ran in a curve and vanished in the trees. My mouth felt dry. I licked my lips and tasted with dust. I tugged gently on the line. The cord hummed. I could see it running back through the front door into the cabin. I could also see my chalk arrows. I could not see the small white rock I had set on the step. I looked down. It was gone. I told myself to stop shaking. I told myself to take notes like I always do. I pulled out a pencil, but my hands would not hold it steady, so I put it away. I took photos instead. The front door, the view ahead, the view behind through the doors. I stepped back inside. I stood in the center of the room, between the two doors, and tried something simple. I closed my eyes and listened. The cabin made a light ticking sound as it cooled in the shade. A fly buzzed in the window. Far off, a woodpecker tapped. If I stood on the left side of the room, the air felt a little colder. If I stood on the right, a little warmer. I walked left to right 5 times, counted my steps. The floor had a soft give in one board near the back. When I stepped on it, I felt a faint vibration, like a cat purring under the floorboards. I did not kneel to check. I walked to the front door again. I touched the frame. The wood was warm, like a person's hand. From inside the cabin, I could see my orange cord tied to the sapling outside. I stepped through. It was evening. I could feel it before I could see it. The air had cooled. The light was low and gold, and the shadows were long. The clearing was the same shape, but the color was wrong, like someone had turned down the blue in the world. The cord ran toward the sapling, but the sapling was full of black moths. They lifted when I moved and then settled again like a living coat. I checked my watch, 11:27 a.m. I checked my camera. The clock still said 11:22. I said out loud, no. I stepped backward through the door into the cabin. It was midday again, flat and pale. I went to the back door and stepped out. The stump clearing. I went back in, crossed the room, and stepped out the front. Evening with moths. I went in again and stood in the center with both doors open. The breeze ran between them, not strong, but steady like a long, slow breath. I held out my hand and felt the air on my fingers. It was warmer by the back door. It was cooler by the front. I thought of a river. I thought of things that live in a river. I'm not proud of what I did then. I should have left. I should have cut the cord, walked to the car, and driven home. But I wanted to know the rule. Places like this have rules. If you understand them, you can leave. That is what I believed. I tied the cord to a beam inside the cabin, not to myself. I laid a second line of chalk on the floor from the front door to the back door. I took a stick and set it upright in the middle of the room. If the world moved, I wanted to see what moved and what stayed. I took one more breath and stepped through the back door into the stump clearing. The stump was closer than it had looked. The rings on it were tight, like the tree had grown in a hard life. Something had been said on it many times. There were shallow grooves on the surface, in a shape I almost knew, like a keyhole but wrong. I put my palm on the wood. It was cold. The cold ran up my arm like water and settled in my chest. I pulled my hand back, and the cold stayed. I heard something behind me. It was the sound of my own camera shutter. I turned fast. No one was there. The cabin sat quiet with both doors open. In the view through the doors, I could see the stick I had set upright. It was leaning now, just a little, toward the back door. I felt the cold sink deeper. A thought came to me then. It came like a clear voice in my head that felt like my own but wasn't. Pick a door and keep it. The thought was simple. It felt like a rule. I believed it. I went back into the cabin and closed the back door. I left the front door open. The breeze stopped. The light in the room changed. The stick stood straight again. My heartbeat steadied a little. I told myself I would only use the front door now. No more switching. No more checking. I would step out, find my line to the sapling, and walk without looking back. I stepped out the front door into evening, moths lifting and settling. I took the cord in my hand and followed it to the sapling. The moths moved, and I saw the knot I had tied. It was my knot, a simple bowline. I touched it and knew the way you know your own handwriting. The ground near the sapling was soft, like something had been standing there for a long time. I looked for the old fire road. I did not see it. I looked for the creek. I did not see it. West should have been to my left. The compass said it was to my right. Pick a door and keep it, I said under my breath like a prayer. Don't look back. I followed the cord. It ran not in a straight line to the road, but in a curve, like it remembered a path I had not walked yet. The trees were closer together than they should have been. Branches brushed my shoulders without making a sound. I could feel a weight at my back, not touching me, but almost, like a person walking close behind in a crowded place. I did not turn around. I walked for a long time. The cord hummed with each step. The forest made no sound but the small pop of dry twigs under my boots. The light did not change. It stayed at that same low gold, as if the sun were caught in the trees. My mouth was so dry I could taste metal. I thought about calling out, and then I thought about what might call back, and I kept quiet. The cord went slack. It should have meant I was close to the end. My hands told me there were only a few loops left. I looked down and saw the knot I used when I bundle rope for storage. I had reached the last coil. I took one more step, expecting road or creek or the silver edge of my car. The cord ended at another door. It stood alone in the trees. No cabin around it, just a door frame with weathered wood and rusted hinges and the same gray paint as the cabin. It was the front door. My chalk arrow was on the frame, pointing out. The sight made my stomach turn. I put my hand on the wood. It was warm. I could have walked away. I could have dropped the cord and pushed through the brush until I found water and followed it down. I could have climbed a tree and looked for the sun. I could have done a lot of things. Instead, I did the thing that felt both wrong and necessary. I opened the door. On the other side was the cabin interior, pale and flat as midday. The stick in the middle was leaning, the way it had leaned before. The chalk line on the floor was smudged, like something had dragged a toe through it. The cord I had tied to the beam trailed across the boards and out of sight, as if it had always been there. I stepped through. The air inside welcomed me like a cool hand on a fever. I stood still a long time. The urge to look behind me was strong. I did not do it. The rule felt louder now, like the cabin itself was saying it. Pick a door and keep it. I walked to the front door, the real one, framed by the real walls. I could see the sapling and the small white rock I had set on the step when I first arrived. It was back, like it had been there all along. The creek glinted through the trees. I could hear the same low glass sound over stones. I stepped out. The world was right. The sun was where it should be. The air smelled like damp leaves and iron. My car sat where I had left it on the fire road. My watch said 12:03. My camera said 11:22. I did not look back at the cabin until I reached the creek. When I did, I saw only trees. The clearing was gone. The roof line was gone. There was no gap in the green at all, as if the forest had grown up in 1 minute. I stood on the old footbridge and listened to the water. It made the same sound it had made when I came in. I stayed there until my hands stopped shaking. At home, I plugged in my camera and looked at the photos. The stove, the table, the horseshoe, the stump, the evening moths, the door in the trees by itself. Every file showed the same time stamp, 11:22. The metadata said the photos had no GPS data, which was normal for that forest, but there was a field I had never seen before. Under orientation, it said unknown, like the camera could not tell which way was up. I printed one picture and taped it above my desk. It is the shot through both doors, front to back, a perfect tunnel of light. If you stare at it long enough, it starts to look like 3 doors or 4. Some days it looks like 2 doors that are not in the same place. Some nights I wake up and my apartment feels tilted to the left, the way that cabin leaned. The air will feel a little colder by the kitchen and a little warmer by the door. I have not gone back to that forest. I still go to old places on weekends, but I do not go alone anymore, and I do not go where the map shows only green. I keep chalk in my pocket and cord in my pack. I still knock before I enter, but I never answer and knock from the other side. I have a new rule on top of all the old ones. Pick a door and keep it. One more thing. A week after the trip, I came home and found a tiny pile of gray paint chips on the floor just inside my front door. I thought I had tracked something in on my boot. I went to get the broom. When I came back, the paint chips had blown into a straight line across the threshold, as if a breeze had passed through my apartment. Both my windows were shut. My fan was off. The air felt like a slow breath moving between two places I could not see. I swept the line away and closed the door gently. Then I took a piece of chalk and drew an arrow on the inside of the frame, pointing out. I don't know if that really does anything. It makes me feel like I have a choice. I tell myself the photo above my desk is just a photo. I tell myself the door in the trees was just a trick of the light. Most days I believe me. I try not to think about what happens to people who pick both doors. I'd heard rumors of a hunting cabin out in the forest north of town. No one could ever point me to its exact spot, but the stories all carried the same detail. People swore the cabin wasn't always in the same place. They said you could walk past a certain clearing one day and see it, then return the next and find nothing but trees. I don't believe in ghost stories, not really. But I do believe in the strange ways forests can trick you. Fog, shadow, silence. I wanted to see for myself. First night. It was late summer when I made camp near the clearing I'd marked on an old topo map. I set up my tent just off the ridge, where I had a view of a shallow bowl of grass below. Nothing unusual stood there, just a few stumps, a scatter of rocks, and the steady wall of trees. I cooked a meal on my little stove, read a chapter from a paperback, and crawled into my sleeping bag when the crickets began to sing. The forest pressed close, dark and steady, until I drifted off. Sometime after midnight, I woke to silence. Not the quiet of night, but a silence that felt heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. I unzipped my tent flap and looked toward the clearing. A cabin stood there. It hadn't been there before. The cabin. It looked old but intact. One story, roof intact, smoke-black chimney leaning slightly. The moonlight washed over its logs, silvering them. From where I sat, I could see a single window. No light burned inside. I thought about grabbing my flashlight and checking it out, but something about the air felt wrong. Too still, too sharp. I closed the tent, convinced myself it was just a dream, and eventually fell back asleep. Morning. At dawn, the clearing was empty again. The grass was flattened in the shape of a rectangle, but no structure stood there. My first thought was that someone had built a cabin, then dismantled it piece by piece. But that made no sense. Who moves a whole cabin overnight? I told myself I must have been half dreaming. Still, I spent the day combing the ridge, hoping to find scraps of wood or nails, anything. The forest gave me nothing. That night, I left my tent flap open just a crack. Second night, it happened again. Around midnight, the forest went silent. I peeked out. The cabin stood in the clearing. Same shape, same chimney, but the window looked different now. I could see something faint behind the glass. Movement, maybe, like a shadow leaning too close to the pane. I raised my camera and snapped a photo. The flash went off, and instantly the shadow jerked back out of sight. My breath caught in my throat. When I checked the photo on the screen, the cabin looked blurred, edges smudged like it hadn't wanted to be captured. I zipped the tent tight and didn't sleep the rest of the night. Third day, I should have packed up and gone home. But something inside me wanted to know more, even though every part of my body screamed against it. I left my tent in place, but I packed my bag with essentials: headlamp, knife, compass, chalk, extra batteries. That evening, I sat outside, waiting. When the silence came, I was ready. The cabin appeared again, closer this time. No longer in the center of the clearing, but near the ridge, maybe 20 yards from my tent. My skin prickled as I realized it was moving closer each night. The door was slightly ajar. I don't know why I stood up. I don't know why I walked toward it, knife in one hand, light in the other. But I did. Inside, the door creaked open under my hand. The air inside was cold, colder than outside by far. My flashlight cut across a single room. Dust hung in the air like fog. 4 chairs stood around a table. A stove leaned in the corner. Against the back wall sat another door, shut tight. What unsettled me most wasn't what I saw, but what I didn't. There were no cobwebs, no insects, no animal nests. It was as if nothing alive dared stay inside. I raised the flashlight and froze. Carved into the beams above the door was a message. It follows. The words were rough, clawed into the wood with desperation. That was enough for me. I turned and ran back to my tent, zipped myself inside, and waited for daylight. Third morning, the cabin was gone again, but when I stepped outside, I found something that hadn't been there before. My tent had been moved. Not far, just a few feet, but the drag marks in the dirt showed clearly that something had shifted it while I slept inside. And stamped into the ground beside it were prints. Not boot prints, not animal tracks, handprints. Final night, I almost drove away. My car keys were already in my hand when I stopped. Something inside me whispered that if I left without knowing, I'd never sleep again. So I stayed. That night, the silence came sooner, and when I looked out, my heart nearly stopped. The cabin was at the very edge of the ridge now, just feet from my tent. Its window glowed faintly, as if a candle burned inside. I forced myself to raise the camera one last time. Through the lens, I saw more than the cabin. I saw faces in the window, dozens of them, pale, hollow-eyed, pressed against the glass as if the room inside was full to bursting. Their mouths opened and closed in silent words. My camera clicked. The flash went off. When the light faded, the faces were gone. But the door of the cabin was no longer ajar. It was wide open, and something stood in the doorway. Escape. I didn't wait to see what it was. I grabbed my pack, left the tent behind, and ran. Branches whipped my face. Roots grabbed at my boots. The forest seemed endless, twisting in ways I didn't recognize. Behind me, I heard the creak of wood moving. Not footsteps, planks bending, timbers shifting, like the whole cabin was dragging itself through the forest after me. I didn't look back. I just ran until the trees broke open and I saw the shimmer of my car in the moonlight. I dove inside, started the engine, and didn't breathe until headlights cut through the dirt road. Aftermath. I haven't camped since. My tent is still out there, somewhere on that ridge, if it hasn't been swallowed by whatever moves that cabin. Sometimes I dream of it, waking in my own bed, looking out the window, and seeing the cabin standing in the street, closer than it should be. I checked the last photo I took before I ran. It came out clear, sharper than the others. The cabin stood in the clearing, window glowing faintly. And in the doorway, blurred but unmistakable, was my own shape. Standing there, watching me run. I've walked through plenty of abandoned cabins in my time. Most are the same: broken windows, mold, raccoon nests, beer-cans left by teenagers. But this one had a door that wouldn't open, and that's what made me stay longer than I should have. It was late October when I hiked into that stretch of forest. The air had the sharp smell of cold leaves, the kind that tells you winter isn't far off. My plan was simple: explore a trail that had fallen out of use, get some photos of the foliage, and be back to my car before dark. The cabin wasn't on any map. I found it by accident, a square of wood tucked behind pine trees, barely visible unless you were looking from just the right angle. The roof sagged in the middle, the chimney had half collapsed, and one wall had warped outward, but it was still standing. I pushed the door open with my boot. It creaked, but it didn't resist. Inside was the usual mess: peeling wallpaper, a table split down the middle, shelves bare except for a couple of rusted tins. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the walls, making thin lines of dust shimmer. I snapped a few photos. Nothing unusual until I noticed the door. At the far end of the cabin, built into the back wall, was another door. Unlike the front, this one was solid. No cracks, no broken panels. A thick wooden slab, darker than the rest of the cabin, with 3 new-looking locks bolted down the frame. That alone was strange. Everything else in the cabin had rotted for decades, but the lock shone with a faint silver sheen, the kind you'd see at a hardware store just a year or 2 ago. Someone had sealed this door recently. I tried to push it just to test. It didn't budge. I bent down, put my flashlight on the floor, and shone the beam at the gap beneath. Dust covered the boards everywhere else, but not here. The floor in front of the locked door looked scuffed, as though something or someone had moved back and forth often. I should have left then. My gut told me the smart thing was to walk out and forget I'd ever seen that door. But curiosity is a disease. I took out my multi-tool and leaned down to check the locks. Each one had been screwed into the frame with care. Someone wanted this door to stay closed. That fact alone made me wonder what was behind it. The walls answered before I got the chance. I heard scratching. At first, I thought it was mice. The kind of faint rustle you expect in places like this. But the sound wasn't small. It wasn't the scatter of tiny feet. It was deliberate, slow, long nails dragging across wood. The scratching came from inside the locked room. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. My breath sounded too loud in the still air. Then came a knock. 3 slow, hollow thuds. Not random. Not wind. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. My rational brain threw excuses at me. Old wood shifting, a raccoon trapped inside. But none of them fit the rhythm of those knocks. The cabin went silent again. I wanted to run, but something pinned me in place. It wasn't courage. It was a pull. The same sick pull you get when you're about to look over the edge of a high place, even though you know you shouldn't. I forced myself to look at the wood around the door. That's when I saw the carvings. They weren't obvious at first, hidden in the grain and dark stains. But once I looked close, I saw them everywhere, small, desperate marks clawed into the wood with something sharp. Words, repeated over and over, stacked on top of each other until they blurred. Don't let them out. My stomach twisted. I staggered backward, nearly tripping over the broken table, when the knocking came again, harder this time. The walls shook. Dust rained from the rafters. And then, faint but clear, came a voice. Please, please open the door. It sounded human. Weak, ragged, like someone who hadn't spoken in days. Everything in me wanted a bolt, but the voice had weight. Desperation. What if someone really was trapped in there? Some lost hiker, some squatter who had been locked in by cruel hands? I forced myself forward and put my ear against the wood. The surface was cold, colder than the air around it. Help me, the voice whispered. I've been here so long. My hand went to the locks. My fingers hovered. That's when I noticed something off. The voice wasn't muffled the way it should have been coming through thick wood. It was too clear, too close, like the speaker was right beside me. And then it changed. The tone shifted from pleading to urgent. Hurry, before it comes back. Before it comes back. I yanked my hand away from the locks. My head spun. Something about those words didn't fit. They weren't right. I stumbled toward the front door. My boot hit the broken table, sending it crashing sideways. The noise was deafening in the small space. That's when the pounding started. Not a knock this time, but full-on fists slamming against the locked door. Wood shuddered. The locks rattled. Dust poured from the ceiling. And over it all, the voice screamed. Let me out. Let me out. Let me out. I didn't wait to hear more. I bolted through the front door, into the trees, branches tearing at my jacket as I ran. The sound followed me, the pounding, the screaming, until the forest swallowed it whole. By the time I reached the trail again, my lungs were burning and my legs were shaking. I didn't stop until I saw my car parked by the old fire road. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and sat with my forehead against the steering wheel, trying not to throw up. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that I'd leave it behind, chalk it up to exhaustion, to imagination twisted by the forest silence. But part of me couldn't let it go. That night, I looked through the photos on my camera. Most were the usual: broken shelves, peeling wallpaper, the scuffed floor in front of the locked door. But in one shot, just one, I caught something I hadn't seen with my eyes. A pale hand. It reached through the narrow gap beneath the locked door. Fingers long and thin, nails black, skin stretched tight over bone. Scratching. The photo timestamp said 3:13 p.m. But I checked my watch. I'd already been out of the forest by then. Someone, or something, kept moving inside after I left. I deleted the photo, but sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I hear it anyway. The steady scratch of nails on wood, and a voice whispering right against my ear. You should have let me out. I don't go looking for ghosts. I go looking for quiet. On weekends, I volunteer with a trail crew. Trash pickup, clearing windfall, repairing little bridges that hikers forget to notice. It's simple work. It gets me out of my head. A late summer storm blew through the mountains on a Friday night. The crew lead texted that a small spur trail might be blocked and asked if anyone could check before the next day's group hike. I said yes. The road was muddy, the kind that pulls at your tires as if the hill wants you back. My phone lost signal at the last cattle gate. I parked by the old fire road and started walking with a handsaw, first aid kit, and a small pack. The forest felt freshly washed. The air had that tin smell lightning leaves behind. Everything dripped. I followed orange blazes, sawed through two small limbs, and made good time until I reached a place where a tree had gone down and taken a corner of the spur with it. A narrow path ran around the mess and up to a low ridge. On top of the ridge stood an old ranger cabin I had only heard about. No longer staffed, just left for emergency shelter. It sat at the edge of a clearing, logs dark with age, a tin chimney like a bent finger. I walked up to check the porch. The door was open a crack. Someone had wedged a small stone in it to keep it from swelling shut. Inside smelled like cold ash and mouse bedding. There was a table, two bunks, a shelf of old field guides, and on the far wall a simple wood map with trails burned into it by hand. The storm had thrown leaves in through a broken pane. Rain had drawn brown lines down the wall like teardrops. On the table under the window sat a radio. Not a little camping radio. It was a heavy old thing, the kind you see in photos of ranger lookouts, black case, big silver dial, a microphone on a curly cord, and a wire that disappeared through the window to a long antenna strung between trees. Somebody had written a call sign across the top in faded marker. The power switch was in the OFF position. The cabin had no electricity. There was no battery box in sight. I touched the front of the radio with one finger. The metal was cold. The moment I touched it, a soft hiss of static came up, so faint I thought I had imagined it. I pulled my hand back. The hiss stayed, probably picking up a tower somewhere. I said out loud, like a person might say to their dog when they are alone. My voice sounded small in the cabin. I tried the power switch, even though it was already off. It was stiff from years of dust, but it clicked. The static did not change. I turned the volume knob. It did nothing. I leaned closer. That was when I heard a voice in the static. At first it was just a shape of speech, like when a neighbor's TV leaks through a thin wall and you hear rhythm but not words. Then, as my head tilted just right, I recognized the words and forgot how to breathe. Don't touch the window. the voice whispered. I was standing with my palm on the window frame. I pulled my hand back as if the wood had burned me. I looked around the cabin. Empty bunks, empty corners, just me and my own quick breath. My heart made a hollow sound in my neck. Stay calm, the voice said. It's okay. It was not a movie voice. It was not deep or echoing. It sounded like someone standing in the next room, speaking low so they wouldn't wake a sleeping baby. There was something else that hooked into me and held tight. The voice sounded a lot like mine. Not exactly, but close enough that my skin lifted. I reached for the microphone without thinking. Hello, I said. Is someone out there? I pressed the push-to-talk button the way I had seen it done in old films. The voice cut through the static at once, sharp and close. Don't transmit. I let go of the mic. The cabin went quiet except for the thin hiss. Please, I said, but not into the microphone, just into the air. Who is this? The voice came back softer. I can hear you without the mic. Don't transmit. Don't give it your voice. What is it? The radio made a sound like a sigh. Then the voice said, you just step forward with your right foot. I looked down. My right boot was a half step in front of the other, toe touching the scuff spot on the wood where people had stood years and years talking into this radio. Okay, I said. My throat was dry. I took off my pack and set it on the table so I could see everything I owned. Saw, headlamp, water, orange flagging tape, a snack bar gone sticky in the heat. I wanted the plain weight of my things to pin me into the real world. You're safe inside, the voice said. For now. For now. Rain did something, the voice said, like it was choosing words carefully. You can think of it like the air is thin in places after a storm. Like the mountain is showing two faces. Outside is one. Inside is another. Stay inside. How do you know what I'm doing? I asked. A small pause. I imagine a person with a hand over the mic, deciding how much to tell. Because I'm about to do it, the voice said. And because I already did. I didn't like that answer, but it was clean in a way. It did not feel like a trick. I walked to the door and pushed it open to look at the sky. The voice came fast, urgent, and close. Stop. I stopped. Bottom porch step, the voice said. It's rotten. If you step there, you'll go through, hit your shin, and it'll bleed like hell. You'll think you're fine, but you'll leave a line of blood down the trail, and something will follow it. I swallowed. I nudged the bottom step with the saw handle. The wood flexed and collapsed like soaked cardboard. A smell came up, wet rot, sour and sweet. I pulled the door shut, slid the iron latch, and stood in the middle of the room with my hands on my hips. Okay, I said. I'm listening. Good, the voice said, and there was this little breath in it that I felt in my own chest. Relief. You're doing fine. Sit. Top bunk left. The slats on the right are warped. I obeyed without thinking. The upper left bunk held my weight with a tired creak. Sitting made my knees stop shaking. I set my saw beside me, teeth inward. The voice kept talking, steady and calm, and I let it cover me like a blanket. Check your water, it said. You have 1 liter. That's enough if you stay put. Don't open the door. Don't look through the glass. If you have to pee, use the bucket under the sink. Do not step out on the porch, not even to spit. Tape a piece of flagging to the latch so you'll notice if it moves. I did each thing. I found the bucket. I tied flagging loosely to the latch. I drank a small mouthful of water and swished it to take the sour taste from my tongue. You're thinking you should leave, it said. You're thinking you can run the ridge and drop to the road faster than anything can catch you. Don't. It's quiet now. It won't be in a little while. What happens in a little while? The voice did not answer that. It asked me to look for a logbook instead. I checked the shelf. Field guides, a manual for the stove, a small, thin-ring binder with a red cover, cabin log. I brought it to the table and opened it. The first pages were maps and phone numbers. Then came entries from old rangers. Dates in the 90s. Weather notes, trail maintenance, warnings to keep chips away from mice. The writing went thin and stopped 15 years ago. Someone had penciled a line last year. Stay inside during storms. Leave the radio off. I touched those last 4 words with my finger. I didn't turn it on, I said. I know, the voice answered. Leave it anyway. Who are you? You, it said, and then after a heartbeat, softer, not exactly. Think of me as the version that stayed calm long enough to tell you what to do. That sank into me like a stone into a lake. My chest felt heavy but steady. I looked at my hands. They were not shaking now. Okay, I said again, and I meant it more. The forest changed around noon. I didn't see it change. I felt it. The air got dense, like before a tornado. You could sense pressure in your ears. The cabin made little cracking sounds, as if it were settling deeper into the hill. The smell changed too, from old ash and damp to something like iron filings and wet wool. Wind moved in the trees without making leaves rustle. It was a noise like cloth being wrung out slow. Something walked onto the porch. Not heavy, not light. A weight that knew where to put itself. The flagging on the latch trembled. I stared at it so hard my eyes watered. Don't move, the voice whispered. Don't speak. It can hear air when it leaves your mouth. The steps stopped in front of the door. An easy hand touched the latch. The flagging lifted and fell without coming loose. The thing on the porch did not knock. It dragged a nail across the wood, slow, and the sound ran up my spine the way a filling buzzes when you chew tinfoil by mistake. From outside, my name came very soft. Not guessed. My real name. The one only family uses, shortened the way my grandfather said it. I felt my throat open to answer because how could you not when your own name is set gently down like that? Like a cup of tea? The radio hissed against my urge. Do not answer. It will use any word you give it. The thing on the porch stepped to the window and leaned close. The room went a little darker, like a cloud moved over the sun. I did not look. I kept my eyes on the flagging. I counted breath in, breath out, long and slow, until it went away. It did not leave like a person. It left like fog clears, a sense of weight, then the idea of weight, and then nothing. I let out air and realized I had been holding it long enough to make myself lightheaded. The voice came back calm and matter of fact. Good. Eat half the bar. Put your saw away. When it gets darker, you'll hear something that sounds like a truck. You'll think rescue is here. It isn't. You'll feel in your bones. Keep the door shut. The afternoon stretched. The storm came back in low growls that moved around the hills. I did what the voice told me. I sat. I ate half the bar and wished it were bigger. I wrote a few words in the log without dates or names. Stay inside. Do not transmit. Don't give it your voice. Toward evening, I heard the truck. It started far off, an engine downshifting on a grade, the way a work truck announces itself out of the trees. The sound tugged at something in me I didn't expect. That noise meant help. It meant other people. It meant normal. Tears surprised me before I knew I was crying. Don't move, the voice said, gentle but firm. If you open the door, it will be a road with ruts and a truck with lights and a man waving. He will say the county sent him. He will say your name, the long one, not the short one. He will ask you to say you hear him. Don't. The sound came right up to the porch and stopped, like the truck had rolled across the clearing that didn't exist and parked. The cabin floor hummed with it. The iron on the stove rang an almost tone that made my molars ache. A door slammed, the deep, hollow slam of an old service truck. A man cleared his throat. Trail crew, he called. Voice like any guy who fixes roads for a living. Tired. Friendly. You in there. I didn't move. Hey, he said. It's okay. You're okay. Come on out. Storm made a mess. We're getting folks down before the next cell comes in. He waited. The latch flagging didn't move. You know me, he said after a while. We talked on the phone this morning. You said you'd head in and text when you got eyes on the blowdown. Say you hear me. Please. My tongue felt like it would break out of my mouth in answer. I bit it. The voice in the radio did not speak now. It trusted me like I was a person worth trusting. The man on the porch knocked once, very softly. Then he knocked again, same rhythm, like he didn't want to scare me. Something in the knock was wrong, and the wrongness was not in the hand, but in the place this sound came from. It sounded like the door was farther away than it looked, or closer, or like the space between my ear and the wood wasn't the same length it had been all day. He waited a long time. Then the engine started again, and the truck went away without going anywhere. The sound just unraveled, thread by thread, until the air was only air again. Night came from the corners of the room inward. I lit the lantern from my pack and set on the table with the wick as low as it would go. The flame made a small island of warm color. The radio hissed like distant rain. Outside, the true rain started again. You did well, the voice said quietly. I hadn't noticed how tense I'd been until I heard that softness. Sleep now. Set your alarm for 4:30. Don't open the door until first light. The step will still be rotten then. Skip it. Walk the ridge until you hit the rock with the lightning scar. Drop left into the drainage. Keep to the center of the creek. Don't look back if you hear anyone say your name. I lay on the bunk and closed my eyes with my boots on. Sleep came in pieces. I dreamed voices moving through static and woke with my heart climbing a ladder out of my chest. Once I woke because someone whispered, "Thank you," at the side of my bed, close enough to fob my cheek with breath. I held still and said nothing. At 4:30, my alarm vibrated under my pillow. I sat up, shoulders screaming from how still I had been. The lantern had gone out. The radio was a low ocean in the dark. "Ready?" the voice asked. "Yes," I whispered, and that one word scraped my throat like a match on a box. "Good," it said. "Open. Step over the first board. Don't touch the frame. Walk." I lifted the latch. The flagging fell to the floor without a sound. I opened the door. Pre-dawn had washed the clearing with milk blue light. Clouds sat on the ridge like a sleeping animal. Everything dripped. The bottom step was a black mouth where wood had been. I stepped over it and didn't look down. "Left," the voice said. "Now straight. Now a little right to miss the route. Good. Keep your eyes where the trail should be, not where the trees say it is." I followed that strange advice and found that my feet landed where the ground held. The forest tried little tricks, one more inviting gap where a path should not be, a branch that brushed my shoulder from the wrong side, a shadow that moved when clouds didn't. I kept walking. I did not speak, even when something behind me used my mother's voice to ask if I had remembered my inhaler, a stupid old worry that caught me in the ribs. When the sky turned from milk to pearl, I saw the rock with the lightning scar. It looked like a frozen river had been poured over it and left there. I dropped left, slid into the little drainage, and stepped in the creek. The water was cold and honest. It took the heat out of my ankles and gave it back as a steady ache. "Good," the voice said, softer now, almost far away. "Stay in the water until the deadlock jam. Then climb. The road is above. You'll hear birds. Real birds. If a truck stops, wait. The first one will be wrong. The second one will be right. The right one will not use your name. Will I see you again?" I asked before I could stop myself. A long pause. Then, "You always do." The creek brought me to the log jam in half an hour. I climbed, hands muddy, pack heavier with water on the straps. The road was right where it should be, a ribbon of wet gravel and a straw wrapper someone had dropped. Birdsong came in like a radio finding a station. Clear, layered, busy, alive. An old pickup rounded the bend, slowed, and stopped. The driver rolled down his window. He was a stranger with a county hat and coffee breath. "You need a lift?" he asked. He did not say my name. I got in. He dropped me in my car and made a phone call to the crew lead, who had been worrying since my last text went nowhere. Before I drove off, I walked to the back of my car and opened the hatch. I dug under my gear until I found the little emergency radio I keep for weather updates. I had never used it here because there's no reception, but I turned the dial anyway. Static. I held my breath the way you do when you're hoping for something and dreading it. Seatbelt, the radio whispered. I buckled it. Then I turned the radio off and wrapped it in a towel and put it under the spare tire. I told myself that was silly and did it anyway. At home, a day later, the storm all over, I sat at my kitchen table with a volunteer form to fill out an incident report. I wrote the safe parts: blow down on the spur, cabin door sticking, porch step rotten. I did not write about a voice in the static. I set the form aside and made tea. When the kettle clicked, the sound was the same pitch as the stove ring had made in the cabin when the knot truck was on the porch. I stood still and listened to the house breathe. On my counter sits a cheap little battery radio. It doesn't work unless you crank it. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't cranked it. Still, somewhere under the kitchen hum, a thin hiss rose like a tide coming in. I leaned close. Don't transmit, the voice whispered, kind and tired and exactly like mine after a long day. I unplugged the radio, even though it wasn't plugged in. I sat in the cupboard with the bowls, closed the door, and pressed my palm to the wood. The hiss faded like a station sliding out of range as a car drops into a valley. I'm not scared of the woods now, but I am careful with my voice. I talk a little less. I answer my name a little slower, especially when I'm alone. When I go back to the mountains, I carry extra flagging and leave a piece tied to the latch of that cabin, so the next person sees it and maybe doesn't open the door right away. I think about the message in the logbook. Leave the radio off. I didn't turn it on. I still don't know what that means.